Good morning and welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. What is happening in the world out there? For once, we're awakening to what I would call a typically sunny day in Texas. Hallelujah. Yeehaw. Amen. All the local vernacular. So here we are. Another 30 minutes under the microscope of space, time, and gravity. I stayed up last night watching Waking Life, which I hadn't seen in quite a few years. If you haven't seen the movie Waking Life, I recommend it. It's a really interesting kind of philosophical trip about life and death and time and dreams and all kinds of other interesting big thoughts. And it was directed by Richard Linklater. Richard Linklater, of course, the director of Dazed and Confused and School of Rock and Everybody Wants Some. Fairly successful Austin director with ties to Alex Jones. Alex Jones actually is in Waking Life. This is an early version of Alex Jones driving down the road in a convertible with his bullhorn talking about the overthrow of freedom, sovereignty by totalitarian forces. This goes all the way back to 2000, I believe, 1 when Waking Life came out. This is right on the heels of 9/11. So they were in production for Waking Life. So the movie itself is it's kind of a dream poem, and the main character is Wiley Wiggins, who also shows up in Dazed and Confused. And in the movie, Wiggins has an event. I don't want to take too much about it because you actually might see it. It's on Netflix, and I believe also on Amazon. You can watch it for free if you have any of those services. And he has an event, and the event sends him into this very long, extended dream space where he meets these characters who acts philosophically about the nature of being and God and the universe. It's all shot in rotoscope, which makes you a little queasy at times, but it also adds to the kind of dreamlike atmosphere of the film. So it's worth watching, and it's pretty inspiring. Ethan Hawke is in it. Again, this is all rotoscoped stuff. Alex Jones has a cameo. It's all shot in Austin. What they do is they actually shot the film, and they shot the scenes, they shot the actors, and they converted them into rotoscope, which is a very strange kind of animation. So this dovetails into the Alex Jones section of the show, and we'll get back to the nature of time and death and rebirth and all the kinds of questions that Waking Life is bringing up, especially as it relates to the world stage, because there's a lot happening on the world stage. It's fairly interesting. As always, never a dull moment on the world stage now. Plenty for us to look at from that perspective. But the dirt here in Austin is that Alex Jones, I want to thank Darren Williams, Dazzled Theory, for bringing this up. Alex Jones is going through a major custody battle here in Austin, and it just started yesterday. And he has already paid his ex-wife, Kelly Violet Nichols, I believe that's her name. Anyway, he's paid her a substantial amount of money already. He paid her $2.5 million. And she has $1 million home, and Jones deeded to her another home that was worth $950,000. Now, Jones's 3 kids live with him. The oldest is 14, youngest is 9, and apparently they had a really hard time finding, because now his ex-wife wants custody of the 3 kids. Now, this is not going to be necessarily a Hollywood gossip show. I'm just giving you kind of an idea of what's going on behind the scenes with the world's #1 alternative media talk source, even though a lot of people are starting to kind of migrate away from Alex Jones because of his wild inconsistencies, the pandering to Trump, and always evading the elephant in the room, which I will talk about. Great article by the Saker. If you have not checked out the Saker over on, I believe it's SOTT, SOTT.net, and the Saker talks about the elephant in the room, which he calls Zog, which is the Zionist occupied government. And two people sent me the article from different people. They don't know each other, but both of them sent me the article. And I read all the way through it last night. It's a big read. Approaches about 7,000 words. There's a lot of ideas in there. Many of you might be familiar with them since you listen to my show, and I highly recommend it. It is worth the time because it completely fleshes out not just what we're having to deal with in terms of the people in Donald Trump's cabinet and kind of the chessboard controllers around the planet, but also why it's important to break the mental chains. This is the next level of deconditioning the politically correct thought and speech. So I've been at this now since 2009, 2010. So I've been working assiduously at getting to places inside of myself where I know how to talk about things and talk about things in a way that are fair and balanced, but at the same time point them out as also being unequal and unjust. And that takes a lot of work because what we have to do is we have to really get past our conditioning. And of course, when we say something like, Black Lives Matter is a psyop, we're immediately accused of being racist. So we have to kind of confront that reaction inside of ourselves. So what does that mean to be racist? What does it look like? And then we do enough soul searching, and the bottom line is we realize, hey, we're not racist. Do we have, at times, our prejudices? Of course. Everybody has prejudices. That's how it works. But there's a difference between having prejudices and being racist. Prejudices can be talked through, worked through, looked at, examined, and then, shown the light, and boom, they're gone. They're like cockroaches. Prejudices are like cockroaches. You put the light on it, they go. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's any hint of racism involved. In fact, it's become very trendy to say that there's no way that the white or Anglo species can get away from racism. That is inherent. It is inborn. And that's just kind of who we are. We're born this way. Again, untrue, patently untrue. I was watching, I'm going to ramble a little bit and bring it all back to center. But I was watching a documentary on Compaq last week. This is when they took on IBM and they took on, it wasn't really, this really just IBM with the personal computer, and they eventually wound up connecting and creating an alliance with all the other clones, as they were known at that time, by forging a bond and alliance with Bill Gates and Intel. And it's through that alliance that the PC world exploded and Gates' software exploded. It was a very interesting, calculated move. But what really struck me about the movie was how these three guys, led by Rod Canyon, put together a company that was up and running and within a year was doing millions of dollars in sales because they had engineered a competitive computer. And what that did is it created all kinds of jobs. And when I saw that movie, I looked at, a lot of the footage was archival, and you looked at who the employees were, and it was incredibly diverse. There were women had high-paying gigs, there were quote-unquote minorities across the board. And I thought to myself, well, of course, this is Houston, one of the most diverse cities in the country, and there was massive wealth, massive growth, and massive opportunity. And it was all created by these three guys who just happened to be white, who just happened to be, Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, whatever kind of descriptor you want to pin that tail. Now, there's the dark side of that, of course, which is the Enron story. It's 9/11. And that is the dark side of the greed and the manipulation. Compaq is the brighter side of the potential for economic growth, innovation across the board for everyone. Everyone. And they had meetings where people chimed in and they gave their The corporate culture of the dot-coms and the internet world was really started at Compaq. A lot of people thought it began at Hewlett-Packard. No, it was at Compaq. So I just wanted to throw that out there because, contrary to popular belief, which is all systems that are created by melanin-challenged people are evil and corrupt, that's not true at all, patently false. And you look at the Compaq story and you'll see an amazing story that created opportunity and wealth and abundance for a large number of people, men and women included. Bottom line, end of story. Okay, so let's bring this back to sort of, kind of where we are. We have Alex Jones going through his, basically his kind of fall, his decline in some ways. It's been a very difficult year for Alex Jones. First of all, he had to deal with Pizzagate, Pettigate, and the legal stuff associated with that. Yes, he had a lot of major kind of Trump momentum, had Trump on a show, you know the story. But now he's dealing with this court case, and he's got these 3 kids, and he's being challenged by his ex-wife. Why is he being challenged? Well, because Alex Jones started to sleep with. Again, I don't want this to be Hollywood Confidential, but it's out there. It's in the news, and they had a very hard time finding jurors because everybody knew who he was, and most people who they talked to did not have a fond view of him. And they were honest. I think they had 60 people in the jury room, and 40 people raised their hand and said, "No, we don't. We know who he is, and we don't like him." That's honesty. And who knows what was going on in the other 20. But they had a hard time finding a jury for him. And the reason why all this happened is because he left his wife for a woman who was an escort and a yoga instructor, had all these different names, and now she's pregnant with this kid, and they got married in January in Hawaii. And for some people, that's like so salacious. And oh my God, look what he's done. He's married this tramp. And I don't care. I don't care. That part I really don't care about. Sometimes people, even Alex Jones in his own weird way deserves some kind of love and companionship and connection. If that's how he finds it, where he finds it, who cares? Who cares if, some people think that she's just scheming now that she's pregnant, she's going to get in and she's going to take him to the cleaners. I really don't care. That part doesn't bother me at all. Look at, want to check out the biblical story? Look at the biblical story. Look at who Jesus hung out with. And I'm not saying that Alex Jones is Jesus, far from it. But, there's a whole judgment trip. Judge not, lest ye be judged. And the really interesting piece around this is there was a guy that went in to Alex Jones's group, and he's actually he does contract work for the FBI to infiltrate these groups and get intel and dirt, and he recreates himself all the time, which is, if you go to this, maybe I'll put the link up somewhere. Maybe I'll put it up on YouTube or something like that. But you can find all the information you need. So, here we go. Alex Jones on trial here in Texas. And again, the reason I'm kind of bringing it up is because he plays a role in this movie, Waking Life. And in Waking Life, the big questions are being asked. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where do we go? What do we do with our time here? It's actually a very spiritual movie in a lot of ways. And yes, it may sound like a bunch of college students sitting around wanking off, talking about existence and culture, and but there's also some very interesting ideas that are floating around, and some of the characters in there are fascinating. And this brings us to the topic of the day, which is awakening into Samsara. So Samsara is this concept that we die, we're born, and we go through some kind of afterlife experience, and we come back and we do it all over again. Go back, Jack, do it again. Wheel turning round and round. Steely Dan. Great song. About incarnation, reincarnation. It's also about gambling. Life is a risk. Life is a gamble. So here we are. We're awakening into this process of samsara because what do we see? We see Trump. We see the neocons. I mean, this is George Bush 2.0 with a twist. We'll get to the twist. But this is George Bush 2.0. Ann Coulter has said, if I wanted Jeb Bush to be my president, I would have voted for him, or Hillary Clinton. And for a lot of people, this is what we're witnessing. This is what we're seeing. A lot of the same characters. We have the neocons, the zyocons. You go to the Sacred, you'll see all the various definitions and kind of why it's important to parse it out. Great job, by the way, of freeing the mind lock, which has to happen. Political correctness was the first stop. We smashed down the wall of political correctness. And once we did that, of course, what were the charges that were now allied against a certain group of people? The deplorables. Oh, well, now, guess what? It's given them the permission to be racist. Because unless you're not under the tight yoke of the dog collar of political correctness, of course, the most obvious reaction or evolution of that would be to become racist. And it's only political correctness that keeps us in our non-racist box, which is a bunch of horse shit. So we've knocked down political correctness, but now there's levels here. I'm telling you, there's levels. You got to face the levels at some point. You got to go through them one by one by one. You got to get through them on the inside. You got to break down the walls, and it's just the bottom line. Because unless we break down these walls, whatever these walls are, speaking truth to power, we are going to be rendered inert. And so we awaken into the samsara, what looks like to me another kind of Bush, foreign, meddling in foreign affairs, the Middle East, the love for Israel, blah, 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 blah. But there's a slight difference here. A slight difference. And this goes back to this notion of some of the themes that came up in Waking Life. And that if you have been following what I've been talking about for a while, that there's this very interesting kind of echo of the Kennedy timeline with Trump. Now, some people say, well, Trump is no Kennedy. This is true. But there are some similarities. They're both Geminis. We know that. Just on a very superficial and topical level, the sign Gemini connects the two of them. But there are more similarities, and we've gone through them again and again and again. The latest scenario that is kind of echoing the Kennedy timeline is the ongoing conflict with North Korea, which is now being labeled Trump's Bay of Pigs. Where have we heard that before? We've heard that with Kennedy and Cuba, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, we've got a missile crisis going on with North Korea. So here we are again. It looks as though this is the cyclical rebirth of the Bush administration. But there's a twist. And there's this interesting wrinkle in time. And it's through the terminology, it's the phraseology, and it's a number of the connections that are associated with Donald Trump. And even Kennedy, in his election, it was an upset. He was not supposed to win. Now, if you follow people in the know who have looked at that election, it's a little scammy. And one of the states that helped put Kennedy into the White House was Illinois, one of the cities, Chicago, and you do the math on that. But Nixon was supposed to be the favorite, the odds-on favorite to win. And the media really helped Kennedy in a lot of ways. And they got the help because Kennedy's old man reached out to his old crime syndicate buddies and asked for some favors. And they helped. They helped get Kennedy elected. And then what we saw with Kennedy, and this is the interesting piece, is that he turned on them. Just like Trump has turned and spun and done a 180 on a number of issues. Now, I was watching Fox News this morning. I don't often do that, but it was on and I was watching it. And I saw that Trump is doing the American trip now. He's back in the American trip. He's going to sign this executive order that's going to limit H1N1 visas, and it's going to be based on the need of the position, the quality of the applicant, and I don't know how they determine these things. Are they given a test? And if they don't pass, they say, sorry, you can't come here. And if they're given a test and they're brilliant, yeah, come on over here. And if you've got any brothers or sisters who are just as smart as you, can they come too? I mean, I don't know how they regulate this stuff. But he's signing this H1N1 thing, and he's talking about buying American, making American. This is another piece, another plank that he's returning to now. So he went out and he did played tough guy. He's still playing tough guy, sending 3 aircraft carriers to North Korea, which will do absolutely nothing. There's nothing they can really do. In fact, they may be in more danger by being there than actually having or striking or striking a pose as a show of force. So here we go. North Korea becomes his Bay of Pigs. Now, there are some people who think that there is something bigger going on. The 4D chess thing. And that Trump and Putin are actually colluding and running a kind of a much higher game. And to what end? I don't know. To what end? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to smash and eliminate the social Marxists? I don't know. I mean, Putin is a shadowy guy. He's got very strong ties to Chabad Lubavitch, just like Jared Kushner does. So they have 2 Chabad Lubavitch devotees inside at a very high level, both the White House and the Kremlin. So if they're trolling the world, then perhaps Chabad Lubavitch is trolling the world, and I'm not sure it's a really good thing. Just saying. It bears some investigation if you have the time. I know I do a lot of this theoretically for us, but you may want to check it out yourself. So we're awakening into this moment of samsara with a twist. And it's important to notice the twist, because the twist, I believe, is what we call a glitch in the matrix. And the glitch in the matrix allows us, I believe, to understand that we're living in this realm of temporality, or this temporal realm, that can be, for lack of a better term, hacked. That we can have a voice, or, how do I say this, a footprint in the realm of this kind of creation of the demiurge. If you want to get into the sort of the Gnostic terminology, we have a choice. We have the potential for impacting this world in a very, at times, subtle and at times profound kind of way. And so, again, as we gather here every day at 9 a.m., I'm your cheerleader. I'm here to tell you to continue your journey. I'm here to tell you to continue to find your passion. I'm here to tell you to continue to do your best to keep your body alive and healthy and to take care of it. I'm here to tell you and support you and cheer you on so that you can have a sense of pride in your life. And it's not easy. Life can be very difficult. We lose people. We lose jobs. We look around and we see just how difficult this dominant paradigm really is. There's wealth that's leaving the country at a horrendous rate. The top 2% get, or not even 2%, it's 0.5%, get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier every single passing day as they create fake money and charge us interest for it. And that's a fact. And we can't turn away from that. We know this to be true, at least on this level. But what we have on our sides, in our hearts and minds, are the ability to be creative and imaginative and loving and caring and to dig down every single day and to make these things a priority. Now, to make it a priority, guess what? You've got to be able to be disciplined and focused, and you've got to be able to be accountable. And this is hard. This is hard. And this is not some kind of existential exercise, although if you watch Waking Life, existentialism does lend itself to a sense of self-management and self-direction, theoretically, because you're taking responsibility for your life through existentialism. I'm not promoting existentialism. What I am promoting, though, is this relationship that we have to the sacred inside of us. That's important. It's important. And we are past the point. This is an interesting perspective. I think we're past the point of rebellion. To rebel against the system, to rise up against the system. We're never going to do that. That's not going to happen. So the rebelliousness is something that we've been weaned on. Every single generation has its version of rebellion. And that is a program that we get plugged into just as our hormones are kicking in. Some might say that the whole LGBT experience or the transgender experience, especially as it relates to high school students or adolescent-aged young people, is a form of rebellion. You're rebelling against form, or rebelling against society, rebelling against parents, rebelling against whatever. That this is just the new version of rock and roll, if you think about it. And to me, it makes some sense, especially if you throw in the vaccine and the genetically modified factors that come in and might make it easier to rebel in this place that is we've never seen before, at least not in these numbers. But we, as a whole, as a culture, raised on rock and roll, raised on rebellion, raised on James Dean, raised on fill in the blank. America loves its rebels. The world to some extent, but America really, it's the outlaw, it's the Wild West. It's cutting against the grain. It's taking on the system, which is in the roots of the country. When we said, hey, look, at least about 48% of us did, or 52% or whatever the percentage was that backed the colonial army. We want a fair deal. We want our history, our future to be self-determined. So it's inside of us. It's inside of our collective DNA, so to speak. But we're at a new level now. And the rebellion model is short-lived. It's usually based on anger. It's usually based on a burst of energy. And if we want to change this world, this planet, and the Sacred gets into this, he talks about having 3 kids. And he says, look, I got 3 kids. I can't look them in the eye and say, I didn't try. And I admire that, and I respect that. And that's where, in a lot of ways, I come from. So we got to play a long game here. It's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to, although who knows, maybe we have, a very interesting kind of metaphysical awakening together, and all of a sudden, we're switching onto these kinds of new abilities or powers or gifts, and then we see the world in a very, very different way, which is not, I think, out of the. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but I think we're here to play a long game, and I think it's important to understand that. And what happens is that through the news cycles and through the stimuli of what's going on, everything becomes shortened. It's like, what's happening next? What's happening next? What's happening next? And the next thing you know, we're reacting to this, reacting to that. And we got to get out of that mode. It's important to look at what's going on. And sometimes we all get sucked into the emotion, to the immediacy, to the moment of it, and it feels like this is it. It's going off the rails. I had a client yesterday, and a young guy. I'm getting more millennials that I'm really, appreciating, their spirit in a lot of ways, because they're trying to get to something. And they've had, look, I think the millennials, on the one hand, did they grow up in the Depression? No, they didn't grow up in the Depression, which is really rough. But I think they've had, in their own way, kind of a rough time. They grew up with 9/11 and sort of the terror of 9/11 and a lot of divorce and the inculcation of the social programming and vaccines and all the other stuff. So they've been swimming against the tide, really, in a lot of ways. So I'm a big promoter of their awakening. And sometimes it's awkward, and sometimes it's clunky, and sometimes it's wrong based on sort of their presets in some ways. I'm just being honest with it, right? But I'm an advocate of their awakening. And anyway, I had this client yesterday, who was a millennial, and he got really freaked out, with what happened in Syria and what happened with the big, gas bomb and this whole kind of saber rattling with North Korea. And he's like freaked out that the world is going to end. And this is a, pretty lucid, college-educated young man. And it was unfortunate to see how, and I get it. I totally get it. I mean, I have to watch myself. So what's going on here? Do I really want to invest in the kind of the... Now, I will invest in the injustice, even if it looks on the surface that perhaps there was some gamesmanship going on here. But I'll protest on the surface, but I'll try to hold off on the fear quotient. Like it was setting up that we were going to have a major event this last weekend, especially as it coincided with Easter and Passover, and everything was lining up. And something did happen. The North Korean missile didn't fire. That's a whole other story. We covered that a little bit yesterday. It looks like now it might be cybersecurity versus the particle beam, but nonetheless, the launch was certainly hacked. But here's a young guy who was kind of terrified by what was going on in the world. And it's unfortunate that we have to live with that. So the way that we deal with that is we play the long game. And the long game is, we are here in this process of awakening. And it's not turning off, and we're not going back. And even the people that went through the awakening through the election of Trump, they are coming along. And eventually what will happen is there will be people, hopefully, from the other side, from the real, true liberal side of things, and they'll see it. They'll see what's happening. Like the Chris Hedges side. If you haven't read Chris Hedges, I really recommend him. He's great. So we're gaining in numbers. I'll give you another example of this. This is quite interesting. Now, I'm not a big Bernie Sanders guy. I think he's a total sellout. And unless you have a very strong commercial base and you can produce a lot of different things, I don't think really communism or socialism, at least communism, works. And we know Bernie's a commie. He's a commie. Bottom line. Yesterday, the new head of the DNC had traveled to Vermont, I believe, to introduce himself. Or I forget where, it was either Vermont or New Hampshire. Anyway, he stood down for about 5 minutes, I think 10 minutes, because the people didn't want him. They wanted Bernie Sanders to be the head of the DNC. They wanted Bernie Sanders' vision to be the vision that the Democratic Party follows. And again, I don't agree with Bernie Sanders. I think he has some interesting things to say about Wall Street, blah, 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 whatever. He's just as much as a hawk. He voted for the war in the Middle East. And anyway, but it was interesting because this was a group that was waking up. And they're not in the right. They're not in the alt-right. They're not on the libertarian side. They're not paleo-conservatives. But clearly, they did not want this guy's name, Peter Ramos, I think his name is. They did not want him to be the leader of the Democratic National Committee because they had an awakening process through Sanders and through what happened with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and how the DNC was hacked. And this guy was just another, Hillary acolyte. And it's very interesting to watch because I think based on that alone, the Democratic Party's got some real trouble. They've got some issues because their version of Trump was essentially co-opted and corrupted. But I'm bringing it up because it's another version of the awakening. So we have to keep going along this path. And we have to keep moving in a direction where, we're speaking truth to power and we're taking care of ourselves and we're being disciplined and we're having pride in who we are. This is a big deal, folks. This is a major, major shift because if you look at the seed of awakening, it starts with a form of rebellion. Like when you were a teenager, when you were an adolescent, you look around and in a lot of ways you can see the world in very clear terms. In other ways it can be very distorted. But what happens is we go through that Saturn opposition at 14, we begin to separate ourselves from the Saturnian influences, the Saturnine influences in our life. And then we begin to redefine ourselves. And it's through that redefinition that Saturnine clarity could come into play. And then when we see what's wrong, or we see what's obtuse, or we see what's disconnected, or we see what's hypocritical, then guess what happens? Then the rebellion kicks in. It's like, screw you, this is wrong, this is unjust. So change, theoretically, is rooted in some form of rebellion. And the awakening is like, the new American Revolution. This is what Alex Jones was selling. We got to move beyond that now. This is not about that anymore. Because rebellion is short-lived. Punk rock only stayed around for about 2 years and became new wave. And I don't have a problem with new wave. It was pretty cool. But it wasn't punk rock. That's when the record companies got a hold of it. Rhythm and blues back in the 1950s and Elvis, pure rebellion, stuck around for about 2 years. And next thing you know, you've got Pat Boone doing Little Richard covers. You see? Rebellion becomes commodified. But if we have a longer-term plan, guess what? Now we have to steward it. We have to parent it. We have to interact with it as if it's going to be around for a while, as if it were our own children, as if it were our own lives. And this is the difference between the two. And I think that's where we are. And look, it could all end in a flash, and all of a sudden you get a guy like McMaster who may have taken, I don't know, too much Viagra the night before, and he's walking around with a steel hard-on for about 3 days, can't get rid of it, and whatever. He's just got to, do something. And next thing you know, we got the Chinese involved and Russians involved, and we're in a prolonged 5-6 year war, which could last that long. The planet wouldn't become a parking lot overnight. Trust me. If there was a conflict, it would last a long time. It would last years. Absolutely years. And the ensuing chaos would be horrible. But hey, look, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. And as a result, we're going to have to live our lives through this awakening process and being stewards of it in ways that are, the long play. It's just the bottom line. So take care of yourself. Take your vitamins. Get your rest. Take care of your body. Take care of your loved ones. This is the nurturing of the awakening through samsara. And we have to. This is our moment in time. That's not going to come tomorrow, or maybe it will. Maybe we have the incredible, magical, major moment, the 100th monkey. But what we need to do is plan and live our lives accordingly, that this is going to be a long-term play. Because if you look at what happened and what's happened with sort of the other great plan, right? The other great plan to dominate the world, their plan is a plan based on, thousands of years. Thousands of years. And passed down from generation to traumatized generation, obsessed and possessed generation after generation. So we have sociopaths standing on the shoulders of sociopaths. But it's a long-term plan. What do we have? We've just been lab rats reacting to everything. Well, we have to put our own long-term plan in. And it's different. It has to be organic. It has to be one person, one individual, one unit at a time committing to this. Break the chains of the politically correct positioning in your mind break the chains of speaking the unspeakable. It is quite liberating. It is scary as hell, but it's quite liberating. Because once you're able to do that, then guess what? You're a little more free than you were the day before. You may lose a few friends along the way, but they probably weren't your friends anyway. They were acquaintances doing time together. All right, that's it for today. It's been your 15 minutes of flame. We're a little bit over today, but I had a lot to say, and then I don't always have a sense as to how long these things are going to go. But today, it went where it went. Have a great Tuesday. I'll be back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with another 15 minutes of flame.